Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here to review the 2006 The Wicker Man, or Nicolas Cage's The Wicker Man, because ultimately this movie had been remade, and so reasonably within this movie, I would say for a lot of people, because this one is probably going to be a little bit more sketchy and or difficult to find a variation for you to watch that is ultimately on some streaming service somewhere. Ultimately, you can probably go into some movie app somewhere and probably bootleg it, probably a movie box or a movie pro or a movie something or other. You could probably bootleg it and watch it. The thing is, there is two versions of this movie. There is the theatrical version, and then there is the unrated version. The unrated version has a scene that you didn't see in the theaters, so it's kind of like there's towards the end of the film there is a much notable, like, when I watch this, I'm like, I've seen the unrated version of this, and I re-caught this movie again, and I'm like, yeah, there's a part missing in this movie. But there also might be more Nicolas Cage cussing in the unrated version. I don't remember. Um, so going into this movie, because I might just have to forcibly rewatch the unrated version just to see what I missed. But it'll be stupid to have two different variations of reviews. Like, yeah, this is the theatrical cut and this is the unrated cut, because I don't want to make that kind of extended amount of additional things just for two different slices of a pie, the same pie. So, anyways, going into this movie, if anything, the very much hands down thing about this movie is you have a very memorable Nicolas Cage performance. It doesn't matter if it's good, it doesn't matter if it's bad, it's very memorable to the point where he's shouting things, he's cussing things, and you're having a good time. That is the overall selling point of going and finding this movie somewhere and finally watching it. Regardless of story, regardless of how this story approaches itself, does anything, whatever, this movie has probably the most kind of top tier Nicolas Cage performances, probably besides Vampire Kiss, which eventually I stubbornly at some point want to review at some point. So I'm going to watch that movie and I'm going to review it, but I just thought, like, hey, I watched this movie, why won't it just be easy for me to just review it? Because ultimately I was probably going to review not only Wicker Man, but then Vampire Kiss back to back. But instead, I just did this. So, going into this movie, memorable Nicolas Cage performance, screaming, yelling, swimming, he does it all in this movie. And running, he does it all. Everything. The Nicolas Cage does everything in this movie, while shouting, cursing, and punching people out. It's great. So, Nicolas Cage in this movie is a machine. It's great. It's awesome. He he heckles kids. He's a machine. He's the greatest Nicolas Cage that has ever Nicolas Caged in this movie. So that is the selling ticket on this movie if you haven't seen it, or ultimately if you are on the fence, or ultimately if you've seen this at some point, you need to re-see it just to be like, yeah, that Nicolas Cage. Anyways, going into this movie, I kind of really don't quite understand the very beginning of this film, because the beginning of this film kind of feels like when looking at the film all together, it kind of feels like a random thing that like you didn't absolutely need to have in this film. Like I kind of felt like the very beginning of this film with Nicolas Cage um doing his job. Like I was just like, okay, what did they absolutely have to show him like doing? Like did he actually have to like did he have it in his contract that he's like, well, hey, I'll do this job, but I want to I want to actually like be a police officer. I don't want to just like be in a diner and just make it look like I'm a cop and then get a letter and now I gotta go to this to some um, secluded area somewhere. No, 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 no. I want to actually do some police work. Make me look good, movie. And so they're like, okay, sure. So going into this, I was like, it's kind of funny about this movie. If you haven't watched it in a very long time, and then you rewatch it, you completely forget about a bulk of this movie, which is not a which isn't a bad thing about this movie. Because if anything, the big takeaways are the big Nicolas Cage things going on in here, and like that is what you always remember. That is what you stick. That's what sticks into your brain till the end of time. But you're always trying to remember, well, what Nicolas Cage movie was that from? And you're like, oh yeah, definitely, I remember. It's The Wicker Man. Like you always remember the title. You always remember the Nicolas Cage outrageous reacting stuff. Like it kind of feel if you edit this movie the right way, it just seems like that Nicolas Cage is like a pariah that's kind of going through this place and just like really just going after people and just like like he could basically be like like um a Nicolas Cage that is just like going through place to place and just like and just hurting people or heckling people or forcing people to do things and this and that. Because if you kind of edit things the right way, you could kind of do any number of things to make this look like a completely different movie, like Nicolas Cage on the Rampage. But anyways, but I still like this movie. It's great. It's interesting, and ultimately, you get to eventually see Nicolas Cage do what he's most notably known for doing in a bulk of his movies, which I will explain that once we get into spoilers. Because every single time, bizarrely, Nicolas Cage always has to do this thing every single time he goes into a movie. I don't know what it is, like Kick Ass and this movie and any number of other films that I probably can't remember the names of at this point, where he does this thing. Usually, when his character has to go in a certain way. So let's go into spoiler time. Let's bring out that double five because ultimately I'm just saying how great and memorable the Nicolas Cage performances were because ultimately that's the best part of the film. That is the best part of the film. This movie doesn't need story. This this movie doesn't need to have a story. This movie doesn't need to do anything. It just has to have Nicolas Cage inside of it and just working his magic that he always does. So, let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time getting to spoil this movie. So, again, to me, this is a great top-notch Nicolas Cage film beyond Vampire Kiss. Ultimately, I was going to review The Wicker Man and Vampire Kiss back to back, But instead, I was just like, you know what? Like, how about I do this movie first, and then ultimately I get to Vampire Kiss at some point because I want to do that. I want to review that. And so ultimately, we're going to get to that because I just enjoy reviewing Nicolas Cage movies because they're good. They're great to me in a different way. I really wish that I probably would have gone into Vampire Kiss because that movie is freaking hilarious. But yeah, this one has quite a bit of good scenes in it. So, spoiler time. So we ultimately have a two cops going into a diner, and they're picking up some Joe. It seems like one of the cops is just kind of glaring out, and immediately, like the nurse is like, or the the waitress is just like, "Hey," and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was blaring out." So Nicolas Cage in this movie is a motorcycle cop. He's a beat cop, but he's on his motorcycle. So we showcase Nicolas Cage giving tickets to people. We showcase him pulling people over, and then we showcase uh, somebody throwing a doll out of a car, and Nicolas Cage, like while still driving his motorcycle, like pulling down his arm to pick it up, and then to pull this woman over to give her daughter back her doll. And so immediately the mother is like, "Oh my god, I'm completely sorry, officer." Uh like she's just in her mood and this and that. And so Nicolas Cage goes, "Oh, hey, yeah, that's completely fine. Hey, I got it for you. I got your doll." And immediately right after this, the girl chucks the doll right back out the window. And then Nicolas Cage goes and picks it up. Like, I would have been like, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I think you need to roll up this window. Like, I want to see this window rolled all the way up." Or have her roll it all the way up for herself. Uh, because reasonably, I don't want to see this doll coming out of this window one more time. Be polite about it, but again, it's just like, this is the second time that you've littered, kid. I can write you a ticket. You do it one more time. Just to give him crap. So he gives him back, or he goes for the doll and then tries to give it back. And then all of a sudden, this semi, or this vehicle comes out of nowhere. I think it's a semi, and collides with this car, this car with the mother and the daughter in it. And so what happens is Nicolas Cage is trying to like open up the doors. What he ends up doing is he takes his helmet and he smashes his helmet through the back window of their car, and is ultimately reaching for the girl that's in the back seat. And what ends up happening is he gets blown from the car, and the car just blows up. So cue him at home, just kind of taking some time off, just trying to just kind of get through some kind of just mental, just like really just need some time off. So one of the detectives come to his house, and she's like, "Yeah, hey, yeah, you taking some time off, I see." Like, "Hey, yeah, well, okay, good for you. Good for you. You're taking time off, and you're just like, there have been some other detectives that might have said that you were thinking about resigning." And Nicolas Cage is like, "No, I'm just taking some time off." That's all I'm doing. Um, if anything, like my dad would, or my one of my family members would kill me if I did that. So basically, Nicolas Cage asks if the mother and daughter were like had any other family, were tied to anybody, and she says no. Like mysteriously, like they weren't like. It seems like they were nobodies. It seems like they were like nobody knew, like there was no connection to them. Like, okay, that's weird. So, excuse me. So we have it to where Nicolas Cage is just kind of like, well, okay, whatever. I guess that's just resolves itself. So Nicolas Cage is still taking some time off, and so he's kind of going through his mail, and evidently there is a letter. There's a letter from a past love of his life, past uh, woman that he had been with, and she's writing him a letter mentioning that, like, I hate to bring this up, but you're the only one that I can come to. It seems like my daughter has been missing for a number of weeks, and hey, just let you know, I have a daughter. So, uh, this woman tells him where she is, and ultimately Nicolas Cage goes out of his way to try and ultimately uh, tell his boss what is going on, and that he needs more time because he needs to leave to go and find this woman, and gives him the note. So it's like, are you serious? It's like, it seems like this place is in the middle of nowhere. Where even is this place? And Nicolas Cage says it's like, well, it's a kind of secluded part of a of a town. It's kind of very like it's kind of its own island, so to speak, and but it's not really a like it's just a very secluded location. So Nicolas Cage goes out and tries to find this place, and so eventually he bumps into uh, this guy that flies an airplane, a small airplane that is delivering to this uh, reserved location. And so Nicolas Cage is like, "Hey man, yeah, this location that I need to go to. Do you know anything about it?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, I fly to there all the time to drop off supplies." And so Nicolas Cage is like, "Well, hey man, I'm going to that same location. Hey, do you think it would be great if I catch a ride?" And the guy's like, no, there's no way I can let you do that. They're very reserved. There's no way I can just let you go ahead and just jump onto my plane and come with me. More than likely, I don't want to mess up this deal I have with them, because more than likely they can cut me off and this and that. So Nicolas Cage does whatever he does. He bribes them. He tells them like, "Hey man, like whatever you need. Like I'm like, if anything, I don't want to swim all the way there, but like I'll do it if I have to. But hopefully I can pass you over some best friends of mine, uh, a George Washington and a Benjamin and this and that and whatever." And so eventually we get it to where the guy just goes, "Okay, sure, I'll let you fly with me." So they ultimately get there, and Nicolas Cage is walking his way up, and so all of a sudden he is talking to three women, immediately asking for girl. I think her name is like Bliss or something. And so immediately the women are saying, "Oh, this is sister bliss or whatever. This is everything is a sister. Everything is like they like that is their thing in this area." Um, but to me, this kind of feels like the like for like Wonder Woman. This feels like the Amazon, where it's kind of like they do have men in this island, but like it's men that like don't say anything. They don't it doesn't really feel like they have a presence on this reserved area, but they exist. So I guess it's good enough for them to just exist. So going into this, these women are ultimately just telling them, "Hey, yeah, how about you uh, go to this bar, this inn." Uh, and ultimately, this woman will tell you like where this girl is. So Nicolas Cage goes into this bar and he immediately asks for this woman, and eventually this said woman shows up. And so because ultimately Nicolas Cage hits this woman with some slang, because ultimately he's asking her, "Hey, do you think I could get a room to rent if you could swing it?" And immediately the woman's just like, "Is that some kind of like is that some kind of like city talk?" And so the girl comes in that he's looking for, and she says, "Manage it," to correct him. So ideally, there is a lot of points where Nicolas Cage is trying to talk to this girl, but a lot of times uh, they have to pull themselves away from other people to talk. So like immediately he doesn't stop her and he's like, "Hey, what's going on? Hey, like I haven't seen you in like 3,000 years," like he ultimately does to Eva Mendes in the Ghost Rider movie. Like, "Do you still like Italian?" Like he doesn't do that in this movie. Like immediately he just gets a room and has goes in the room, and then eventually like the girl that he's been looking for shows him to this room, and then eventually leaves a note for him that, "Hey, like I get off at this time, come to this location and we'll talk." So he reads the note, she narrates the note, and so eventually once his shift is over, he goes out to meet her. And so a lot of times when they have these kind of talks away, we have it to where she mentions that ultimately like her kid is lost and has been lost for 2 weeks, and then ultimately like Nicolas Cage is like, "Well, why can't you have like the dad find it?" And she's like, "Well, you're the only one I trust." Because it seems like for her being at this place is very sketchy to her, which is what that seems. So immediately she is at some point going to tell him that this girl is actually his daughter. And so that pushes him even more to find this girl that is just somewhere, this Rowan. So we get it to where Nicolas Cage is looking for this girl everywhere. Like it's getting to the point where instead of just nicely going into locations and ultimately saying, "Hey, yeah, like I'm gonna come in here. Could I please just kind of check if anybody knows anything? No, Nicolas Cage just comes barging in, and a lot of times he is just like telling everybody, it's like, well, hey, I am a police officer, so at some point I'm gonna be questioning everybody, and so yeah, if ultimately I'm looking for the whereabouts of this girl, we have it to where eventually Nicolas Cage goes into this school, and ultimately every single time he shows a picture of this girl to anybody, nobody knows who she is. And so eventually when she goes into the school, she has it to where, or Nicolas Cage has it to where he shows the picture to every single one of the kids. And he ultimately asks, like, well, yeah, is this student, do any of you other kids know this girl? All of them all say no. And then, of course, the teacher says no. And so Nicolas Cage goes, well, there's one missing desk in this classroom. So eventually he opens the desk. Bizarrely, there's a crow that flies out of the desk. And he's like, "Oh my God! Why do you have this? Why do you have this? The bird in the desk?" And bizarrely, they wanted to see how long the bird would last into the desk. And he's like, "That is weird." So Nicolas Cage doesn't really ask, but he's like, I'm going to look around here to ultimately see if there's any kind of like evidence of this girl being here. So he starts grabbing a bunch of like paperwork. He starts going through uh, all these like notebooks and all these books and whatever, and then he skims through like this attendance book, and he sees Rowan right on the book, and so he's like, aha. He's like, so all of you have been lying that this girl exists in your class. Why? And so it gets to the point to where the teacher forcibly has to pull him away from the class. And so we have it to where this teacher is kind of just trying as much as possible to give him absolutely nothing, to where he just frustratingly just leaves. Even after she pulls him out. So we have it to where Nicolas Cage is going to bed into this inn, and it seems like consistently someone comes in there and goes into clean his room. I say clean his room because stuff goes missing. Stuff goes missing. Nicolas Cage talks to the younger girl that is kind of the housekeeper, or the housekeeper-esh like woman, and he's ultimately just like, hey, did you take my tapes? Like, I had some tapes in here, like their title was like Make Me Happy or something. Like they were kind of his coping tapes or something. And she's immediately just like, they're like, yeah, I bet they were. And then she walks away or something like that. It's like, yeah, I'm sure, I'm like, that's good to know, or something like that. And so she leaves. And so immediately, like, Nicolas Cage is checking through all this stuff to make sure it's all there. And it seems like for the most point, it's all there. So Nicolas Cage is going through here, and we are more and more having so many people never know that this girl has existed. But it seems that when Nicolas Cage is taking this medication, it seems like it's not probably doing the right things for him, because I think, if anything, like either this medication or they're probably drugging him through some other ways. Ultimately, some point at the bar, when he comes to the bar for the first time, he sees a bee flying in the bar, and he squishes the bee, and the maiden that's there ultimately says, "Why did you do that?" And we ultimately get to know that supposedly Nicolas Cage's character is allergic to bees. So going into this movie, supposedly this town's thing is that they make honey. But bizarrely, when Nicolas Cage has like food in here, like the honey is store bought, and he's like, that's kind of weird. So ultimately, Nicolas Cage asks around, and it seems like there are certain women that are desperate to leave this town. Hence the girl that kind of supposedly cleaned his room. When he goes to her to ask her if he saw the if this girl had seen this young girl, the girl says no, and then she's like, "Hey, if you ever leave her, can I go with you?" And so he and she does it like uncomfortably, like touches him and whatever, and he's like, you know what? I kind of have another thing going, because ultimately with confronting his past love, he ultimately asks her, like, why is it that she ran away from him? Because ultimately they were supposed to get married, and he didn't even know that she had a baby on the way. And it's like, well, hey, like, what happened? We were supposed to get married. All of a sudden, you vanished. What happened? So the girl that he was there to see, ultimately, she mentions that she had gotten cold feet, and ultimately the only place that she knew besides being with him was at this place, and so she ran here. And she was like, please don't blame me for coming back here, and just like, please. And so he's ultimately just like, oh, come on. Like, and so eventually they get to the point of just like kissing, and so it feels like Nicolas Cage is very much relying on her, or maybe either relying on her or getting suckered in at some point. So it just gets to the point to where eventually Nicolas Cage starts to find out that there are certain festivals going on in this society. It seems we find out more and more, like Nicolas Cage tries to help out one of the guys when some of their tree logs falls over, and he saves one of them, and then he's like, "Oh, are you okay?" And the guy says absolutely nothing, and he's just like, "Okay, like you guys are just weird." So eventually he goes to eventually go and keep looking for Rowan, and he starts finding little evidence of where she could have been. He ultimately finds a doll of hers, and brings it up to her mother, and he's like, "Hey, this is her doll, like, and it's burnt. How did it get burnt? How did it get burnt? How did it get burnt?" So she's like, "Whoa, I don't know. I don't know." And so basically, this guy is desperately wanting to find this girl, and like to the point where he's going and uh like going into these like sewers. He's trying to swim for her in the water. He's trying to find her everywhere. He at some point thinks that he had gotten her, but he thought he had gotten her, but it was just a corpse. And So he had woken up. That part where he had went in the water and tried to get her and found her was a dream, and he had woken up and she had been in his arms again as a corpse, and then he woke up again. And he's like, mother. So we have it again to where more and more we're starting to find slowly but surely. Nicolas Cage eventually at some point finds the airplane pilot eventually at some part of the shore, and it seems like he is had lost his eyes and lost his mouth, and they had all been sewn shut, and he's just like, oh my god, this is getting crazy. So eventually there is so much evidence stacking up, and eventually it gets to the point where they tell him about all these festivals on how, and eventually that one of the photos had been supposedly broken the night before, and Nicolas Cage had seen a little girl running out of the inn, and so he goes to chase after her, thinking it's Rowan. So eventually we get to the aspect of Nicolas Cage just assuming, because ultimately they said that one of their rituals is a, because eventually he talks to the girl that he came here for, and talks about the festivals, their rituals, like what does this all mean. And so eventually the girl tells him the truth, supposedly, and tells him that there are sacrifices that goes on for certain rituals. Like, especially if the crop doesn't go good the year before, we have a ritual to do a sacrifice to have a good prosperous crop. And so immediately Nicolas Cage is just like, oh my god, they are holding my daughter somewhere, and they're preparing her and getting her ready for this sacrifice, this ritual. So ultimately, eventually, he has a couple hours to try and find his daughter through this town somewhere. So he is just scrambling through every single home in every single part of this town, going through. And while everybody is starting to get ready for the festival and they're starting to put their masks on, Nicolas Cage is just start rummaging through people and knocking off their masks, and like, oh, okay, this isn't Rowan. Like, I need to keep trying to find Rowan. Where is she? And every single time I go into some house, I'll be like, have you, like, is Rowan here? Like, if anything, you're like, if you're not telling me the truth, like, you'll be you'll be an accomplice to murder. Like, and if anything, he keeps like bringing up this whole murder thing. It's like this is like, it's, if anything, you'll be tied for murder if you don't speak. Tell me, confess. Like, he's just knocking down doors and freaking breaking down doors and opening doors and just going like, "Hey, is Rowan in here? Like, if you don't tell me the truth, you're gonna be accomplice to murder." And so it just keeps going through houses and freaking knocking masks off kids to see who they are, and everybody's laughing at him. Everybody's laughing at him. Everybody's like, ha ha ha. They're pointing at him and they're laughing. They're having a good laugh, and he doesn't understand what's going on. So it's like this entire town is all laughing at him, and he's not in on the joke. So Nicolas Cage just desperately is just like God, there is like there's no way to figure out in time where Rowan is. I might as well just go to this festival. I might as well sneak into it somehow. And so we have Nicolas Cage, who is going back into his room, and there was a moment here before where at some point he had went somewhere and he had gotten infected by, or like had bees attack him at some point to try to find Rowan. And so the problem was, at the very last ditch minute, he couldn't get to uh his thing, to his his heart needle, his god was uh the energy heart needle, the uh whatever it's called, the I'm trying to think of what it's called, uh the epinephrine or whatever, the god, whatever the, like, he had some needle for his heart, and he was going to use it, but instead he passed out before he could use it, and he wakes up in the hospital where they take care of uh his bee stings the natural way, and ultimately he doesn't die from it. So cue him going back into his room again, and so ultimately we find two people talking, and ultimately that leads Nicolas Cage to just go, like, this girl is getting some costume for the festival, and so ultimately, like, hey, like, this seems like a pretty good time to just punch her out. Punch her out, take her costume, and then go into this festival as her. But then eventually go all the way to, as quickly as possible, meet uh, meet up with the girl that he came here for, and told her, like, hey, I thought you were going to wait for me. And she's like, I cannot not go to this festival. Like, if anything, if I don't go, like, it'll stick out, people will get concerned. So they go to this festival, this ritual, and we immediately have this much older woman that Nicolas Cage meets before, and because ultimately she is a, a relative of, like, she's the mother of the girl that he came here for. And so, like, they had talked previously before about the rituals and stuff like that. And so we ultimately have this older woman doing this ritual, and ultimately we see Rowan, who is tied onto this tree, and, like, yeah, get ready for the sacrifice, get ready for the ritual. And so Nicolas Cage, ultimately seeing Rowan, runs to her, unties her, and then uh, like, takes off his mask, grabs her, and then just starts running. There's a bunch of people, there's a bunch of men and whoever that are all running behind him, and so eventually it gets to the point to where uh, Nicolas Cage and this girl are running. So they keep trying to run out of this forest, but then eventually the girl starts running faster than he is, and it gets to the point where the girl runs right back to her mother and her grandmother. And so Nicolas Cage is just like, well, it's like, I guess there's like pretty much nothing I can do because if I try to grab this girl and try to run, like, where are we gonna go? So Nicolas Cage is toting a gun at everybody, and they are starting to circle around, and they are starting to tell him the truth. They are telling him now that it's like the ritual was not to sacrifice this girl. The ritual was to sacrifice a person that is tied by blood to this area. So Nicolas Cage is technically tied by blood to this area, hence him being okay to be killed off. And so ultimately they're telling him what tends to happen in this location. There are women from time to time that if they can't find a man in this location, they ultimately go off somewhere and then come back. But that is always the consistent thing that they tend to do. Eventually, at some point later, doing what they do to Nicolas Cage, leaving a note, getting him to track back here because they find uh, good moral men, I guess, at the end of all this. So usually people that save people are usually they just trying to find the best kind of people at the end of the day that are willing to uh, like go and find them once they come a calling. So reasonably they end up kind of giving him the rundown of basically what all they do through these processes of getting him to come here. And so eventually Nicolas Cage is just godsmacked, but then again he is just like, well, like I have a gun, so if anything, like nobody's gonna mess with me. So everybody starts continually circling around him. It eventually gets to the point where people start to get too close, and so he just starts firing away. The only problem is, in very much die-hard terms, oh, no bullets! Because, of course, with these people probably consistently cleaning his room or watching over him, they probably took the bullets out of his gun. And so what just happens is he starts to kick and or punch people, and then they eventually take him and break both of his legs, and he's screaming, "Ah, my legs, my legs!" And so again, the unrated version. So ultimately, there is a point to where they break his legs, I believe, and then shortly thereafter, they end up putting a bee a bee-like bird cage over this guy's head, and then start pouring in all these bees on Nicolas Cage's head. He's like, "Ah, the bees!" And so the bees start stinging him like crazy, and so what ends up happening is they take Nicolas Cage and they take him to this giant Wicker Man like statue that is like probably 100 feet maybe tall or something like that. 100 feet tall maybe. So they take him to this statue and they ultimately tell him it's like, yeah, this is the Wicker Man, and this is what we do for the men that have to be sacrificed. We put them in this. We put them in this big Wicker Man, and then they burn him alive. They burn him alive. So Nicolas Cage goes up to the head of, he ultimately gets shoved into this Wicker Man, and then he gets propped all the way up to go to the very top of this Wicker Man, and then the little girl, the Rowan girl, lights the statue on fire. So, of course, like every single Nicolas Cage movie, Nicolas Cage has to be lit on fire and die. And because Nicolas Cage can't get out, his legs are broken, and then ultimately it's just like, how is he going to get out of this? If he even gets out of it, like there's tons and tons of people all around this town that are probably going to, like, he's not going to, where exactly how's he going to get out of this? He's not. So he just burns alive. We ultimately see the Wicker Man just burn alive, and everybody's just like, yeah, what another great ritual that we have all the time. Yeah, high five, everybody. So that ultimately leads to them thinking about making a sequel out of this. We have the same two women that we have two women that of course come from this island, or this reserved island, and they go out somewhere, and they go out to this club to meet two guys. And so basically, they're kind of saying whatever they're saying to these guys, James Franco and the other guy that I know from the movie Good Dick. It's the only movie I remember him from, really. Very much more so than anything else, because that's probably the most recent thing that I've seen him in. But anyways, they ultimately are like saying whatever, all good and this and that, to really get these guys in bed, because really that's the end goal. Sleep with them, get another baby, and then call them back whenever they dare in fact have a kid, and then this and that. So really, that's just how this movie ends. At the end of it all, I probably could have gone into much more detail about certain things, but at the end of the day, this is already a 52-minute review. That's all I wanted to get into about this review. I should have probably went into a little bit more detail. I apologize about that, but when going into it, there is like a bulk of certain things that I had mentioned. So for 52 some odd minutes, so really good Nicolas Cage movie. But at the end of the day, why should I have to say that to you? Ultimately, if you don't know about this movie, you need to know about this movie. So I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.